Welcome to the ChangeMakers podcast, produced by City Current and powered by Higginbotham. I'm your host, Jeremy Park, and we always love having our City Current partners come on the show as we do a deep dive, sharing their personal journey and their purpose and their why. In this case, we're talking with Principal with Immix Law Group, Jerry Carleton. And Jerry, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm good, Jeremy. How are you?
Doing good. So we always like to start with the backstory, so where you grew up. So let's go ahead and dive into your childhood. Give us a little bit of background on where you grew up.
Sure. Grew up in Chico, California, Northern California. Where I grew up, the Bay Area was Central California. So it's important to know. Some people say, oh, Northern California, like the Bay Area. No. North of there, very rural, agricultural type area.
So what were the things that you enjoyed doing as a kid?
Well, I enjoyed goofing off with my siblings. I enjoyed 49er football, going to those games, watching those games, any outdoor sports, just being a kid.
How many brothers, how many sisters? Give us a little bit of that dynamic.
Sure. I had two brothers and a sister, and I claim the title as the true middle child. I've got an older brother, then it's me, then a younger sister who's the only girl, and then a younger brother. And so I wasn't the oldest, wasn't the youngest, wasn't the only girl. And that's why I think I get to claim it.
Are there any traditions, special moments when you look back at those formative years, anything that stands out to you as moments that you keep today?
Sure. Yeah, I think it was a pretty fun blend of, we were a very competitive family, but also loved each other very deeply. We had a lot of funny sayings like second place is the first loser. It's not about fun, it's about winning. I mean, all of these things could be incredibly unhealthy, but for also the love that bound us together. We also looked out for each other. We went through some pretty hard stuff as kids. I can share, I was part of the statistics of clergy abuse. All my siblings were. And so that's pretty rough to go through as a kid. And so to have each other's backs was important.
When you're going through the tough moments, especially as a kid and with a family, did you lean on each other in any way? Was it individual and kind of pulling it internal? Was any of that as a support network, or was it more of an internal battle and struggle that you carried with you?
It was mostly knowing that you were loved because we were picked off individually. And then our response to that trauma also was to split it off. And so dissociative identity disorder is the official title for it. We all have it. And so we split off that trauma, didn't carry it with us consciously, but just the underlying knowledge that we were loved, that I know I can speak personally for me, that Jesus loves me, that Jesus was there with me, was key to survival. Because as a kid going through terrible things, I mean, you shouldn't be going through things like that. And so you could have a complete break, you could have a complete breakdown, your life could be derailed. Plenty of people that I grew up with that was the case. Each of those choices are what happened to them. And so to have not had that happen came from a strong foundation of just knowing that I was loved, even though what was happening to me was not a good expression of love.
How were you able to get through that when you look at grade school, college? Share a little bit of that transition.
Sure. A big part of it was the DID, was being able to split it off so that I didn't carry it consciously. Our brains are so incredible. The miracle of the human mind is amazing to me. But that's a huge part of how I credit being able to survive, staying on track, staying on a positive trajectory, where other people that were in the same situation that I was in that did not stay on a positive trajectory.
Talk about some of your college experience, because what's interesting about your story we'll get into is you didn't set out to be an attorney and have Immix Law Group, so you went down a completely different path. So start kind of taking us down that path.
Sure. Yeah. So, college for me, part of it was a chance to be somewhere else. I moved across state lines. That was very impactful for me. Getting away from the place that I grew up was important and was positive for me. And being on my own was a big part of it, and starting to make those decisions, in life. Who am I going to be? What am I going to be when I grow up? All of that came up in big ways for me in college. And I had planned out what I thought my career was going to be, but my career was very different than what I had planned. Even where I went to school was very different than what I had planned. And I just saw the hand of the divine all over it and directing me as I went. But as it relates to this conversation, how I ended up as an attorney, funny enough, I had gone into business before I ever thought about law school. Did not intend to be an attorney. Wasn't going to go to law school. Didn't have attorneys in my family growing up, but launched a business right out of undergrad, and that came about because I had a college roommate that needed a product that didn't exist. See, he had grown up without legs. He'd been using fake legs and crutches his whole life to walk. By the time we were prescribed, by the time we made it through college, our senior year of college, he was prescribed to a wheelchair. The doctors had told him double shoulder replacement surgery, wheelchair the rest of your life, because he'd been walking on crutches his whole life. He said, no way. Why can't we put a shock absorber in a crutch? That idea was the beginning of our company. We started prototyping. We grabbed an engineering buddy or two that didn't have a capstone project yet, asked them, if they want to help us. They did. This is what we need. This is what the prototype should look like. And they did it. It worked. It was amazing. And then funny enough, I had, after graduation, gone to take a job that I thought I was going to be doing, came back to move a freezer from my college guy house. It was just needed to move a freezer back to an uncle I had borrowed it from. And my college roommate said, let me take you to lunch. I said, great. And so we went to lunch, slides in this box of business cards, says Jerry Carleton, president and COO, Keen Crutches. I look at this thing, and no, this isn't it. My brain is just saying, no, I've got plans and these aren't the plans. And I got to tell you, Jeremy, it was a head to toe spirit rush, just stopping me in that moment of the Almighty saying, this is what I have for you instead. So not that, but this. And so even though it wasn't what I thought I was going to be doing, I said yes. And he showed me how this product was working for him. It was keeping him out of a wheelchair. And he said, this isn't for just me. We need to provide this to other people. And so I moved back into that house I just moved out of. We launched this company in a dining room in North Portland and had no idea what we were doing, but thankfully knew that and would ask a lot of questions. And we would get people who knew, who were in business, who were farther along with us, and ask them a ton of questions. I like to say all the time, we had equal parts vision, passion, naivete. Needed the naivete. We were stepping into the most regulated industry in the US, even more so than the airline industry. And by the grace of God, it worked out. We made so many mistakes in those early years of the company, but never the big mistake that actually killed the company. We kept falling forward every time. And it was in the process of growing that company that I kept having frustrating experiences with legal. That the lawyers, they could tell me what the law said, but not how it applied to me. It was like they would slap on these legal blinders and just focus on the law and not the application. And thing after thing would happen. I'll tell you some of the funny stories. One of the funny stories was we were going to miss payroll. We had not missed payroll as an organization. Things were tight, but we had not missed payroll. I was really nervous. I called my attorneys, and it was, we had a bunch of product come into port, and we needed the product. We needed to fill the orders. I didn't realize I was using all the cash, but I used the money to get the product. And then here, I didn't have the money to call in payroll. And so I called the attorney. Oh my gosh, I've totally screwed up. What do I do? Never missed payroll before. What's going to happen? The answer is, well, Mr. Carleton, we can't advise you to break the law. Okay, great. Don't advise me to break the law. But again, I just need to know what's going to happen. I've made this mistake and I need to make it right. But what's going to happen? Well, no, you're putting me in this terrible ethical position. Okay, well, hypothetical question. If I didn't make payroll, what would happen? Well, no, you can't play that game. You can't unring the bell. Wait, it's a physics problem. Nothing you tell me will change the fact that I cannot make payroll. And still couldn't get to an answer. Now, I did get billed for that phone call, but did not get to an answer. Like, okay, this isn't working. I call an entrepreneur buddy. Hey, have you ever missed payroll? Yes. What did you do? Called everyone together. I apologized profusely. I told them exactly when they'd have the money. I made sure no one was going to bounce any checks. Apologized profusely again. End of meeting. Like, okay, great. I'm going to do that. Did that. Brought everyone together. It was terrible, but it worked and we were just fine. And not knowing, are they going to arrest me? Or are they going to lock my front doors? I just had no idea as a first-time entrepreneur. Well, thankfully we never missed payroll again, but it was just amazing how I could talk to other business owners and they've been along that path and they knew what to do and they had answers to the questions, but I could talk to the attorneys and again, there was this miss in application. Well, as you know, and as we've talked about before, the straw that broke the camel's back I got a $14,000 bill for a $12,000 fight. I had gotten this bill from a contractor we had hired for $12,000. And rewind to, I had hired him to provide a scope of services for 25 grand. Didn't really like the results, but had already paid him, whatever, just told him this isn't working out. We're going to break up. He said, well, if you're going to break up with me, I'm going to charge you for the 12 I never charged you. I said, well, no, you're not. Our agreement was for 25. I don't even like what I got yet. And I was just going to say, keep the money, but let's move on. And he said, no, I'm going to send you this bill. You owe me an extra 12. No way. I told him, no way. I get a legal letter. It sounds very scary. I call my attorneys. Hey, what do? I got this legal letter. It says pay up or else. And they looked at it. They looked at the agreement. I said, well, don't worry. You're right. He's wrong. Tell this guy to pound sand. I said, great, pound sand. He sued us. I sued him back on advice of counsel. Fast forward to, I'm in a hallway waiting to be deposed. Shame on me. I didn't have the aha moment sooner than that. But I look at my attorney and say, hey, we've been spending a lot of time together. How much do I owe you? And he said, oh, don't worry, we're running a tidy ship. Saw a pro forma this morning. You're only around 12 grand. No, he said 14. And I said, wait, stop. We are fighting over 12. And you've already accrued 14. No way. There's no way. This makes no sense. And it's funny, now that I'm an attorney, now that I've been practicing for a long time, he was running a tidy ship. That's amazing that I was standing there in a hallway waiting to be deposed and my bill was only 14 grand. The problem was we should have never been there. And so I just stopped everything. I walked in, I said, hey, Crook, will you take 9? He said, yes. He said, yes, so fast. I wish I would have offered less, but I didn't. And I looked at my attorney, I said, and you get 3. Give me a break. My all in here is 12. I'm going to go to law school, find out what the heck you jokers know, never hire an attorney again. And my wife makes fun of me because now I have 24 attorneys on payroll. But I mean, that was the move. That was the moment where I said, that's it. I'm going to be a lawyer. And it wasn't an intent to go practice. It was just an intent. I was going to add in-house counsel to my title as president and COO of our durable medical equipment company. But God was in that too. Led to this massive pivot. Here I am.
Carry that into this pivot of, okay, I'm going to go to law school.
Yeah.
I'm going to become an attorney. I'm going to, pull these pieces together. Walk us through what's that like, because I've got to believe there's a little bit of frustration. There's a chip on your shoulder. Like, I'm going to go through this and power through this. But like, what was your mindset going through?
Yeah, so mindset started out as just, again, going to add in-house counsel and going to stay at the company. No intent of practicing. And so it did help even as I was navigating law school to not be of the mindset that I'm going to get out into the market, I'm going to compete, I'm going to go after these jobs that everyone else is applying for. I already had my job. I was running the company by day. I was in law school by night. But it also allowed me to live in this beautiful place of application, even the whole time I was in. And we even talked about it in the night program of how we felt like we had a bit of a leg up over the students that were going during the day, because the students that were there during the day only had the text. They only had the case studies. They only had what was assigned reading to them, whereas we had what we were doing by day. I mean, we'd come in at night, and I got to tell you, professors either loved us or hated us. And I got to say, sometimes it was the tenured professors that hated us and the adjunct professors that loved us. But we'd walk in and they'd expound this nice legal theory. And, I'd raise my hand. I was happy to share and say, wait a minute, that's nice, but here's what I saw happen by day. And again, sometimes the tenured profs walk back, hey, Mr. Carleton, stick to the text. Well, no, I'm really curious. I want to know. And a lot of the adjunct professors, oh, good example. Let's dive in. And then once they got to know that I was running a company by day, sometimes they would stop and say, this isn't legal advice. I'm not giving you legal advice right now. I say, yeah, hypothetically, if this would happen. But I got to watch this application happen. And I loved it when people engaged in that application. And I was like a kid in a candy store every night because I was watching this collision of legal and business come together. And it made it where we didn't have to study as much because the application was always there and was always running. And so it was just so exciting as I started to pivot and realize I was going to practice upon graduation rather than go back to running the business, that I got to live it as I was learning it, that it was coming together in real time.
So you knew before you graduated that you actually wanted to pivot then fully?
Not fully. What I'm trying to figure out what I had admitted to myself, because even my business partner was ahead of me. He saw where this was going. I mean, he saw how much fun I was having, how much it was lighting me up being in this, and even what I was bringing back to the workplace by day. But the summer before I graduated, I did an internship at a law firm and got to practice that application full time instead of just being in class and running the business. And so I had flipped my schedule for that summer, funny enough, where I was doing law by day and then doing my duties for the company at night instead of what I had been doing during school. And it was like drinking out of a fire hose. It was so amazing and it was so much fun. And so that internship was the moment where I sat down. I said, you know what? I'm not going to really get the fully rounded out legal education unless I'm in this position to practice and to apply it outside of just the one company. And so for the fully rounded education, I really should practice after graduating. And so I sat down my business partner and said, hey, just to make sure I get the fully rounded education, why don't I go into a law firm? I'll do what I did during the clerkship. I'll make sure that my duties are covered by night, but I'll practice by day. He said, great. And so I went to a law firm thinking I was going to be there for a year, had all these stories. I mean, anytime we were catching up, I was telling him stories about how much fun I was having. And so at the 1 year mark, it was no surprise to him that I said, I'm still drinking from the fire hose. I'm still learning so much. How about I just practice one more year? And yeah, sure. Practice one more year. It wasn't until the second anniversary after graduation, I was actually standing outside of our headquarters having this aha moment of, I'm not coming back. I'm going to actually practice. And it was funny. Like I mentioned earlier, he was born without legs. And this particular day, he didn't have his legs on. He was scooting by on his skateboard in front of the front door. And he saw me standing out there kind of looking to heaven. And he said, hey, I know you're not coming back. Just come in and we'll talk about it. Okay, fine. So he was way ahead of me on where I was in my own journey, but had that aha moment, said, yes, this is a pivot. This is something I'm going to do differently now. And absolutely adore the ability to stay engaged in businesses. My wife and I have launched 15 companies now together, all in. We just love to spin things up when it makes sense to do so. And so I stay in the practice of business, even while I'm in the practice of law. And that way I get to stay in this intersection.
Do you think, and this is just me kind of looking from an outsider's perspective, but the challenge of overcoming challenges, right? Like as an attorney, you're seeing all of these different challenges where you can play a role and provide a solution and be a helper, right? Like offer expertise and guidance. You want to help others. And so in this way, you're helping many with their challenges and being, a champion to be able to get them on the right path. Do you think that plays a role in why you enjoy Immix Law Group over necessarily the one challenge day to day over here with one entity? In other words, being able to help many is an important piece of your purpose?
It absolutely is. It's funny. My girls are now 12 and 13, but when they were younger, they would ask me what I did. Daddy, what's your job? And I'd say, I help people. Or they'd say, well, what do you help them with? And I said, well, I help them solve their problems, or get a place where they need to go. And it was never about the law. It was not that I'm an attorney, and it didn't matter. I mean, that really has been a big part of my purpose is to help others. And I mean, back to where we started, I just saw being on this path. I had been allowed to be on this path so that I could help others. I mean, there's a lot of work I do now with abuse survivors as well to make sure that they know that they are loved, that they are safe, that it wasn't their fault. And I would have never been able to do that had I not been on that path. And so I do think it's all really come together to be part of my journey.
Well, go ahead and dive into Immix Law Group. We've been talking about it. So go ahead and describe what you do and describe kind of the launch of Immix Law Group.
Sure. So Immix means to combine. So we talk about this combination of business and law together. And Immix Law came about. I had been in big law for 4 years. All my entrepreneur buddies took bets on how long I'd last as someone else's W-2, and I had outlasted all their bets of 4 years. But the firm that I was at, and I was super thankful to have been there, they were going through some very significant challenges. They went through an implosion of sorts. In 90 days, they lost more than a third of their attorneys. And so I just thought I was going to move my practice into another similarly sized law firm. Been very fortunate to have a great book of business, a lot of entrepreneurs who found me in my approach. And so I was just interviewing with other firms of similar size to the one that I was leaving. And it was actually so I was in Portland, Oregon at the time. I was up in Seattle, Washington, meeting with the CEO of another large firm. And it's going through my list and things that I wanted to see in order to come over. And it was a down legal economy at the time. And so I was getting to kind of provide a list of things I wanted to see to say yes. And I was going through that list and getting a yes on everything. And And even when I got a no, it turned into a yes. Like one of the things I asked, well, I need to come in as a partner. And she said, well, we're a large organization. Don't worry, you'll come in on the fast track. And I said, well, no, thanks. Deal breaker for me. And she waited. She said, I am allowed to make a discretionary partner, so I can deliver on that promise. What else is on your list? I took that moment to say, wow, and just I said an internal prayer in my head. Thank you, Lord. This is a piece of cake. This feels like it's going really well. And as only a friend would, I just felt like I got a soft slap upside the back of the head of, no, this isn't it. Thanks for asking. Okay, sorry. Get out of the meeting politely. Go talk to my wife. She'd been praying for me while I was in the meeting. She said, and I said, this isn't it. She said, I know. Okay, tell me more. She said, well, I was praying for you while you were in there, and I just got the sense we're supposed to launch a law firm. What? Head to toe spirit rush for me. And it'd been kind of fun that coming from her, because she had told me after the DME company, the durable medical equipment company, that I'd go one and done on startups. We had so many times where we had almost killed that company, and she had lived most of that journey with me, that she'd said that, that was the end of that journey. And so that God knew he had to tell her first instead of tell me. And so that was super exciting for me to hear, and got the affirmation, this is what we're going to do. And that was in mid-March of 2011. We were open April 1st of 2011. So in 2 weeks, put together a law firm and launched, and we're in business. And we thought it'd be pretty funny to launch on April Fool's Day. And it has been. It's been fun to celebrate that as our anniversary every year, because the town we're in is a pretty small legal community. And so there was a lot of people just saying, what are you doing? I even had friends and family reaching out to me. What are you doing? You have succeeded as far as this profession is concerned. Being a partner in a large firm can move as a partner into another large firm. Everything has worked. You've got, my first daughter had been born. Second one was on the way. She was born later that year. And so it wasn't a time for a big risk or anything crazy. And so that's these well-intentioned people in my life reached out to say, no, this isn't a time for risk. What are you doing? But both my wife and I so clearly had heard the call. We knew we were supposed to do this. And so no fear, no trepidation. We just did it. And you find business principles too are fungible, across industries. Here we had learned so much doing durable medical equipment. It applies to law, even though it's a product versus a service, but cash really is king. That's not just cliche. I mean, I love to tell people, it's funny. The very first company I launched, I had business cards and logo gear before I had revenue. We launched the firm. I had my first round of bills out before I even bothered about business cards, because who needs a business card? You need revenue, and we got to the business cards, of course, but it just reorders things. So you really can reuse those things you learn.
What brought you to Franklin and Nashville, Tennessee?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good one. The grace of God and a school, a very specific school. So both my girls have learning-based differences, and they're different from each other. And interestingly enough, it's prompted some other moves in our lives. Like when we had moved from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington, it was to get to a school for my oldest. And that school is sacred ground for us. I mean, it had been her fourth school at that point, and getting there, they had her reading in 4 days. I mean, she has severe dyslexia and had not been able to read yet, and was realizing that she wasn't understanding like the other students were in her classroom. And it was getting dangerous. I mean, she would lock herself in the bathroom all day. She left the building once, so we knew we had to get to a different place, that there had to be a different way. Even rewind a little bit more of, I mean, when we took her to preschool, her preschool teacher sat us down and said, hey, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but your daughter's slow. And I remember looking at that teacher and saying, look, lady, her brain's moving faster than ours is. That's not it. What else you got? Now, I didn't know yet that she was dealing with dyslexia. I also didn't know yet that the dyslexic brain moves 5 times faster than our brains. And so that wasn't it at all. But if we had received that, what a tragedy. I mean, and talk about a trajectory change for our daughter. And so for her, that we didn't receive that information, that instead we stayed curious, we kept asking questions, kept trying different things. And then we get to this school in Seattle where they understand dyslexia. They teach to the dyslexic brain. And in 4 days, they had her reading. It was just amazing. And so interestingly enough, when we got to the school in Franklin, Tennessee, or in Brentwood, Tennessee, they did the testing for her to come in, and they said, are you sure she's dyslexic? We said, I promise, she is, but she had so internalized the toolbox that she learned from the school in Seattle, and her reading is so good now. It's amazing what you can do with the right type of instruction. So anyway, we were just on this journey for a school. So both girls, their differences are different from each other. Again, we hadn't found a school that could house both until we found Curry, Ingram, and Brentwood. But that's what prompted the move. We actually came from Florida at the time up to Tennessee just to go to this school.
What's really cool about like these interviews is like I'm sitting there listening, I was like, that's so cool because you're drawing inspiration from your kids, from your wife. Like, as much as you inspire them as the father, the husband, they're inspiring you. And you've got this natural curiosity and this natural inclination to be able to like, okay, what's going to be the best foundation for their success? How can we manage through these over here, what are perceived risks, but ultimately make us stronger as a family and more successful to create more opportunities? And so, very, very cool. So how does your wife, how do your children inspire you? Because I think that's kind of a cool, like, underpinning of this.
They inspire me all the time. I mean, it's interesting. It's Monday. We were just over the weekend at their practice. They both ride horses competitively, and the things they can make these horses do. I mean, again, they're 12 and 13, and they've only been riding for 2 years, and they're incredible at what they do. Last time I got on a horse was in high school, so I have no idea how any of this works, but I am in awe of what they can do. And I tell them as much. They can do something so much better than I can. I'm in awe of how they overcome challenges and differences. I mean, again, with my oldest with dyslexia, she's overcome a lot of interesting challenges. My youngest, she has other learning-based differences, but she is also very dark-skinned, and we've lived in some very white places, and she's had to overcome being the center of attention without wanting to be. That she doesn't get to choose sometimes when she's the center of attention. And the internal fortitude, the strength that gives her inspires me incredibly. I mean, she is one of the toughest kids that I know. And so I get inspired by these girls all the time. And both of my girls are adopted. They were adopted from birth. Sometimes people will say, wow, that's such a great thing that you've done. And to me, it never feels that way because I won. These girls, I'm the recipient of something incredible that these girls are my daughters.
That's awesome. So let's bounce it back to Immix Law Group. So one of the cool things for you, which I mean, I think listeners and viewers can already tell, like you take a very different approach. And when you look at what that means for an entrepreneur who's going through a challenge and how you can relate to them, and as business owners, business leaders, and their challenges, and also too, just I've had a chance to interview some of the other team members and the expertise, the focus, like in the video game industry, like very, very cool what you do. So give us a little bit of what makes Immix Law Group unique.
Sure. Yeah. I'll go back to even the namesake of combining business and law together, that our attorneys need to have business experience in order to be on our team because it's so holistic to how we provide advice. And we see this play out in so many ways. I lead our mergers and acquisitions practice. And so you see it come through in deals all the time where attorneys will get distracted by things that don't actually matter in context. I mean, let's be clear, they matter a lot in some deals, but in other deals, they don't matter at all. I'll give you two simple examples. One, got a call from opposing counsel on a deal. It was a merger that was happening. It was a share exchange. And so it was all coming down to the shares. And she called me up and was kind of upset, saying we had rounded the wrong way. And her client was due an extra share in this deal. I said, hey, time out. You're right. You can have an extra share, no problem. Before you called, did you do the math on what that share costs? And well, no, it just, wanted to make sure we got the right amount of shares. Sure, 11 cents was the answer. So this exchange, we've already lost money for our clients. However long you took checking the math and then calling me, like 11 cents. Come on. Or one of my favorites, I had opposing counsel that was calling because they wanted to do a page turn through the representations and warranties on the deal. It was a significant size deal, nine-figure deal, and he wanted to block 2 hours to do it. And I said, well, no, I think we need 15 minutes. And he probably thought I was a crazy person, but I was quiet. And he said, no, block 2 hours, whatever. So we get on a Zoom together and he starts wanting to do a page turn through every line of the representations and warranties. And again, that's a super important section in a lot of deals. I said, wait, before you do that, riddle me this. Number one, don't we have reps and warrants insurance for the whole purchase price? And he said, yes. I said, number two, didn't we do a holdback for every identified liability you think that we could have in this deal? Yes. Number three, didn't we personally, unconditionally guarantee everything in this deal that the sellers did? And these deal points, the way this got negotiated, I mean, my clients were younger. This was more money than they ever expected to have. Like, they were fine giving things that normally we'd push back and normally we'd fight for differently, but they had happily given on these things because this was 3 times their wildest dreams of what they were selling for. And so this was very pro buyer in a lot of ways, and especially on those 3 things I just mentioned. And I said, so wait, you have all those things. You're triple insured. Why do you care what it says? It could say Jerry's a good guy. It could say Jerry's a bad guy. It could say things that don't matter. It doesn't matter because you are triple insured. Oh, you're right. It was a 5-minute phone call, let alone a 2-hour phone call. I mean, again, bringing it into context of the size of deal, the type of transaction, where the actual risk is. I mean, sometimes we'll get at bats just because competitors they'll refuse to see it this way. I mean, I got to call one of my larger buy side clients to this day. I got the phone call because they wanted to pick up this tiny little competitor. And I mean tiny. This was a solopreneur. They were a massive company. This guy had a patent and a certain know-how, and they needed to hire him and buy his IP. Tiny little deal. And their current firm, who they had had for more than a decade and loved, said, well, it's still M&A. It's still a normal transaction. It's going to cost you $250,000 without breaking a sweat. And he said, that's 3 times purchase price. Like, I'm going to pay you 3 times what I'm going to even pay to buy this company. I mean, because again, tiny little deal. And they said, well, no, we've got to run the same process. Sorry. And I got the phone call instead. And I said, well, okay, I understand. You know each other. These parties knew each other. They already were in good contact. They had already negotiated the deal. I'm like, so you just need me to paper it? Yeah. And you understand you're taking the risk. I'm not doing any diligence. I'm not diving in. Yes. Okay. I'll let you choose your risk. We'll just paper it. I needed less than 10 hours. I mean, it was a couple grand. It was a very simple transaction. And so because we were willing to right size it to a deal, we ended up getting the client and still do their work today. I mean, I had the biggest professional delta of my career once where on a same day close, we closed one deal that it was a little wine bar that was trading hands, 60 grand all in was the purchase price. On the same day, we closed a GovTech deal for $143 million. You better believe we had different processes in place for those 2 transactions. And that's okay. And so that's one of our sweet spots, is to right sizing to the deal. But this plays out in other areas too. I mentioned our video game practice or even our IP practice. I mean, we have one really fun example. You know, people will get cease and desist letters. And a lot of times, you know, even if they have the better trademark, it might not make sense to fight it. You know, one of my favorites of all time, and this was more than just making lemonade out of lemons. We had a tiny little microbrew client. They got a cease and desist letter from a massive winery who said, you know, you need to change your name. You're infringing our trademark or else. And, you know, what I usually do and did in this case, you know, got permission from the client, but I'll call up the person who sent it and say, hey, look, we have our trademark. We think our trademark's better than yours, but let's not fight about it. Why don't you pay us to change our name? You know, pay us a couple $100,000. That'll be cheaper than what you're going to pay in court. I mean, a federal trademark suit, that's $500,000 without breaking a sweat. You know, so why don't you pay us instead? Everyone goes away happy. You'll be out of pocket less, and we'll change our name. A lot of times that gets a yes. We move on. People really appreciate it. This particular case, not only did it get a no, I believe that I even was told, we're going to squish you like a bug. I was like, wow, that's charming. And so anyway, that was not going to go. So our client instead, you know, we still weren't going to fight it. We still had the better trademark. You know, if I had been like the original attorneys I dealt with, it's like, no, you're right, they're wrong, let's go to court. No, what a terrible idea, especially for this tiny little company. And so instead, they took it to social media. They said, hey, this company is telling us to change our name. What should we change it to? The outpouring of love and support, and we quoted them on, they said they were going to squish us like a bug. The outpouring of loving and support for this tiny little company, the hate mail to the big company, of course, that wasn't what we wanted, but still, that was pretty prolific. I mean, they ended up going from just being a tiny little regional brand to being a national brand. They even got a national talk show. It was hilarious, the press that got out of this deal. So the business grew because they changed their name, because they had drawn this trademark fight. Instead of, they could have gone to court, they could have been in litigation. What a disaster.
What you're sharing too is perspective. We talk about it with our team a lot of times is don't get tripped over the pennies to get to the dollars. Like
Yeah.
you focus on the wrong things. You focus on the things that ultimately are going to cost you money or not make you any money versus
Mhm.
like the bigger picture of what's the most important.
Yeah.
How do you synthesize that into like advice for others on not getting tripped up over the pennies? But everything you're talking about is perspective, right? Like having a deep appreciation and a good perspective for the big picture versus losing it in the small, over here. So how do you share that with your team on, hey, let's focus on this, the most important aspects versus over here where the fight really isn't that important?
Yeah. I mean, we tell people all the time, know why. You've got to know the why. You've always got to ask the question why. And then you've got to zoom out. You got to make sure whenever, especially if you're in conflict of any kind, you can zoom out, that emotions aren't pulling you into a place that you shouldn't be. And we also have, two sets of eyes rule within the firm to make sure that even though we have a team that is built with people that live at this intersection, that know business and law together, that they don't get pulled in with their clients as well. There's a second set of eyes on it. Someone else is looking over their shoulder saying, well, okay, let's think about this. Let's just make sure that you're not getting pulled into the wrong fight, that instead we know what is the big picture. Because again, like that example I gave you earlier, if I had been, well, opposing counsel got distracted by, we should have gotten one more share instead of how much does that share cost? And so working within a team, I think is important. And again, always asking the why and always zooming out, because sometimes the why really changes what it is you're doing. And we do a lot of complex planning. Sometimes it's planning that transitions wealth between generations. Never forget one of the really cool client that I have today that they walked in the door and they wanted a certain particular exotic kind of trust. I said, why? Well, my neighbor has one and he's really smart. And I think I should do the things that he does. I said, well, are these things true? And I give him some examples and said, no, none of that's true. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to stretch a bit. How about these things? Are any of these things true? I give him some other examples. No, none of that's true. Okay, I'm really stretching now. Any of these things true? And he said, no. So you do not need this trust. You could have paid me. I could have created this trust, but you don't actually need it. Let's make sure your why is in the right place. And I gave him all sorts of whys that might have made sense, but they didn't make sense for his circumstance. And so we got to build that trust. And then he came in, I mean, trust as in he trusts me. No, we didn't build the trust that he came in the door asking about. But then he came in with a level of confidence that we weren't going to take him down the wrong road.
I think it's also important, like you mentioned too, taking the emotion out allows for a, much more clarity in terms of the way you're thinking.
Yeah.
Shift over and talk about philanthropic efforts because as you alluded, you and your wife have started other businesses, heavily involved in a lot of nonprofits. And so talk about charity, philanthropy. Why is community engagement so important? Why is giving back so important?
Sure. I mean, to me, so many people gave back to me or took time to make sure that I was on the right path. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, when we launched that first business, we had no idea what we were doing, but we knew that. And so we asked people who had been there and we would try to treat for coffee, for lunch, for anything. And they would even pay because they knew we were in a dining room and had no idea what we were doing. And so that people would take their time out. That's something that we love to do as well. And even when we do work within the nonprofit sector, to us, it's still a business. It's still a business that needs to be sustainable. Some of the times that we step in, it's to help them get to a sustainable place as a business. To us, nonprofit is just a tax status. And so it still needs to make sure it has revenue and that it controls its costs and that who does it serve? Sometimes we'll step into an organization that exists to have a payroll and exists to employ the people on payroll and go, wait a minute, is that what you're telling your donors? And so just asking the question, I've been asked before on board retreats to stop calling it the company, instead, can you call it the charity? And I said, well, why? It's a company, it still needs to function as a company. It still needs to be healthy. And because the goal is to serve this population. So if we want to serve this population, we need to be healthy as a company to be able to do it. And so we just absolutely love helping on that front. But then, I mean, really, it stems just from this notion of so much has been given to us, so much is expected. And that's not in a negative way at all. It's a very positive thing that we carry. When much is given, much is expected. I mean, I shouldn't be alive for so many reasons right now, and I am. And so I need to make sure that this life counts. and we are called to help others. I mean, life is a team sport. We're going to do it in community. And so how can we best help others? We're always looking for those efficiencies, for those places where our effort can be magnified in a bigger way, where it will have an exponential effect, because there's only so many hours in the day, so many dollars we have access to. So how can we make sure that it has the biggest impact?
Give me one volunteer experience or serving with a nonprofit on a board, but give me one special moment that puts a smile on your face.
So many. There's one that comes to mind immediately of everything that we were just talking about. So I had helped, and this was a very funny calling. It was like the Holy Spirit just kind of put things together to get me involved in this specific maternity home. So this is back when we lived in Portland, Oregon. And women in crisis pregnancy is something that we care deeply about, making sure that they have help. So many times people will make it political, or they'll make it religious, or that they'll have all these reasons not to help. It's like, but these people still need help, and we still need to help them. Anyway, so we got this letter that just, randomly came to our house, and this is after I started practicing law, but got this letter, and I said, wow, it's a maternity home, and they look like they're a really cool place. And I was running 1,000,000 miles an hour, but just sent them a check and didn't think of it. I think, oh, that was cool. Send them a donation, done. The receipt comes in the mail, and my wife gets the receipt and says, this has got to be an error. We haven't given any, I don't even know who this is. We haven't given any money to them. So they must have a mistake. And she calls them up and she says, excuse me, we got a receipt, but we've never given you any money. And they said, well, is your husband Jerry? Yeah, that's my husband. And she, well, he sent us money. Oh, okay. Well, tell me what you do. And so they were having this conversation. And in a moment that she credits to the Holy Spirit nudging her, she said, oh, do you guys need an attorney? And I said that was a big deal for her, because she's very jealous of my time, appropriately so, especially we're in a season of life where we're being pulled in a million directions. And she said, do you need an attorney? And she hadn't been volunteering my time in any other context. And the woman on the other end of the phone started crying and said, oh my gosh, we were just praying earlier today, and we just really need help. And okay, well, let me get him in there. And so we go to tour this place. By the way, the thing that was totally stressing her out actually wasn't a big deal. I get to do that a lot of the times, where something that feels big really isn't, just because we know that it's not a big deal, but they had no reason to know that it's not a big deal. So we got to just take care of that concern right out of the gates by being in a conversation with them. Then I get a tour of this place, and the holistic nature of their services blew me away. I cried like a baby. It was so beautiful how they were loving on these girls, building community around them, making sure that they knew they were loved and that education was important, and just meeting them where they were at and helping them make a transition with this life event that was happening. And so anyways, well, let me help. Where can I help? And obviously the legal thing, but what else? Say, oh, we're having a board meeting on Wednesday. Great. Can I please come to your board meeting? Sure. So I come to the board meeting, and everyone sits down, and the mood's kind of somber, and like, hey, I'm the new guy, I'm just here visiting. And the chair opens the meeting by saying, well, there's only $17 in the bank. And this thing that's been going forever, unfortunately, it's got to fold, and I resign as chair. And that was a rough way to kick off a meeting. And so, the chair who had resigned excused herself, and here we are. And I said, well, hey, I'm sorry, I'm new here, but can someone just show me the financials? And so they pull the financials, and we start going through it, and I just start rolling up my sleeves and, hey, can we do this? Can we do this? And start making changes. Just hands-on, got to work. And then at some point during the meeting, someone says, oh, should we vote you on as a director? Do you want to be a director? Yeah, I'd be happy to be there. I'd be happy to help you. But that organization, I think I served on that board for 5 years. And in that time, took it from, again, stepped in when there was $17 a bag. I thought they were going out of business. Stepped down when they had, I think, 5 years operating in the bank, had just become a sustainable organization by focusing on some core business principles. They were so good at the services they were providing at the ministry, but just were lacking the core business principles. So by bringing that, they were very sustainable. They were very healthy. And interestingly enough, I stepped off that board only to start what became a foundation to fundraise for maternity homes. Because this is, again, when I was in Portland, Oregon. And in that time, in the 5 years I've been on the one, Portland went from having 6 of these maternity homes to having 1. The one that I was helping with was the only one left standing. The need hadn't gone away. It was just all the other ones had gone out of business. It was a really rough cycle in the economy, and a lot of them had gone under. And so we stepped out to fundraise just for these type of organizations. And back to what I said a moment ago, we just found that raising money for this target population was hard because of other issues that were none of their doing. The first nonprofit we had launched was around kids with disabilities. I know now, I didn't know at the time, but I know now, piece of cake to fundraise. People are happy to write a check, whereas I started fundraising for women in crisis pregnancy. I kid you not, the baggage that would come up. I mean, I had people that were, again, calling it something that was political, people on the far left telling me this is a pro-life thing cloaked in, a wolf in sheepskin's clothing. Like, no, don't worry. The choice has already been made. She's decided to carry the baby to term. And I mean, but it's not about that. We're not lobbying. We're not doing anything political. She just needs help. Can we help her, please? And I have people on the far right saying, hey, she made her bed, let her sleep in it. I'm like, excuse me, were you pimped out for the first time at age 12? No? Okay, do not pass a judgment like that. Give me a break. I mean, just, it was crazy, the stuff, the excuses that people would make to not want to help a girl in crisis pregnancy. And so we found they just needed help as a fundraising, to have a fundraising engine that could rise above all of that. So we created this organization where we checked all of our political differences at the door. We had people all across the political spectrum. We had people of different faith backgrounds. And we said, let's just work together to help. And that was incredibly fruitful.
This is one of those conversations that could go on for hours, but we're getting close to time. So one last question, and then we'll switch over into a fun lightning round. And the question is kind of self-serving because I have a niece in law school. What advice would you give a student in law school?
Know your why. I mean, this is so important for law school in particular. I'll never forget, I had a professor when I started law school that wanted to take a little poll on the first day of all these first years and see, why are you here? How many people it's so that you can make a lot of money? People would raise their hand. So how many people so that people will respect you because you know what you're talking about in some area? People would raise their hand. I had this funny edge case. I was just trying to be in-house counsel to my company, but he challenged us, if you don't know your why, you're not going to make it. It was one of those moments of look to your left, look to your right. One of these people isn't going to make it. The other person who does, one of you three is going to have substance abuse issues, addiction, problems in their marriages. I mean, all of that. It's a pretty depressing pep talk. But all of it came down to, if your why is pure, you're going to break through. And it even influences how you treat law school. Like for me, because I was there to be in-house counsel for a business, I didn't have to worry about reading every page of every assignment. Instead, it was just constant application. And that actually helped me get better grades, quite frankly, than I had been too stressed about. Or, I mean, I always love, one of the things anyone needs to know in law school, especially if they're teaching the Socratic method, what's the worst thing that can happen if the professor calls on you and you don't know the answer? It's that you don't know the answer. That's okay. It'll be okay. I mean, there's so much stress and anxiety that goes, I don't want to look bad in front of my classmates. I don't want to look bad in front of the president. Who cares? Who cares? But it's knowing your why. I mean, we get to do this with entrepreneur clients all the time, especially with clients that are going to start a business for the first time. I'll tell them this, if they've had a long career of being an employee of someone else, of receiving W-2 wages. So why are you doing this? Well, and I hear all sorts of answers, but sometimes you hear what I think are the wrong answers. I want to be my own boss. Okay. I want to work half-time. Wow. Which 12 hours of the day? I mean, let's be really clear. Everything is on you. So you're going to be working all the time, but then you hear the answers that are good and pure. I mean, you hear, well, I have this vision. I have this thing. I'm the only person. I'm uniquely qualified to do it. Like my skin crawls if I don't bring this into existence. Yes. Because it's not if, it's when you're going to hit challenges. When you hit those challenges, if your why is pure, you're going to bust through them because there's no other option. You just need to make it happen. Whereas if it's not pure, well, you're probably going to go back and get a job, And so again, they've got to know why they're doing it.
Yeah, good stuff. I love it. Let's switch over and do a lightning round. So short questions, short answers. What do you like to do to relax?
Most of the time it's watch my girls ride horses, but sometimes that's not very relaxing, like if they get bucked off or if some accident happens in the ring. But most of the time it's that. I also enjoy golfing, just being outside, but less time to golf with the girls riding on circuit now. We're traveling around everywhere and watching them in shows. But I did find something that I can do to relax wherever we are in the world, and that's run. I just love the biofeedback of pounding the pavement.
So, what's a recent movie or TV show that you've watched?
The Chosen. Love The Chosen. It's so good. If
What
anyone
about
hasn't
a
seen it,
recent
highly
book?
recommend. Yeah. I read a lot of books, and so I don't want to treat that one too casually.
What's the first one that pops into your head?
Well, I mean, the Bible, because I read it all the time. And people, shoot, I've read it more than a dozen times, but it's always coming to life every day. As far as something else that someone can pick up, I mean, it depends on, do you want to be entertained? Do you want to learn something? So many things, but the 5 levels of leadership. I mean, if whenever I'm talking to people who are interested in leadership, that's a John Maxwell classic. It's just incredible. If you're gonna try to put yourself in a position of leadership, I always recommend that one. The Go Giver. If people are trying to figure out what to do in life, that one just tees it up so well. So many books. Sorry, I could get distracted on that one.
Yeah, the Go Giver is one of those. We actually did like bought 5 copies, gave them to 5 people,
Oh,
encouraged them to buy 5 more, and to
yeah.
kind of create a whole thing. So that's awesome.
Mhm.
Where's a favorite place to vacation for you and your family?
Well, you just complicated by saying "and my family." When you said for me, going down to the beach in the Panhandle of Florida, I absolutely adore it. We had moved there from the Pacific Northwest down to the 30A stretch of Florida, the most beautiful beach I've ever been to, and I love being down there. But the family doesn't like that as much because they're not on their horses when they're down there. So it's usually daddy's fault if we're going down to the beach. As far as the whole family, usually wherever we're going to a show. I mean, one of their favorite places to go to shows is Ocala, Florida, the World Equestrian Center. If you've never been there, check it out. I mean, it is fantastic as far as a show venue, but then a place to go and a place to be.
When you have visitors come to town, what are some things you like to do?
Sure. Well, it depends on where the visitor is coming from. But because I lived in Portland, Oregon for 20 years, I have a lot of people that will come visit from Portland. And Portland thinks that it knows donuts. It doesn't. Strong words, but it's earned. 5 daughters. Oh my goodness. It's almost a first stop. I will pick people up from the airport and we'll go to 5 daughters either at the factory or at 12 South and just make sure that they get to experience a next level donut experience.
I love it. And you're speaking my language. Those are really good donuts.
They're good donuts.
What, what's a favorite quote or saying? You don't have to get it verbatim, but what's a quote or saying that inspires you?
Well, this one will be hyper personal, but it's a struggle for me can be getting too busy and then being stressed that I'm behind or that I'm not, doing as well as I need to be in helping all the people in my life. And that's a way that I can be attacked, that I'm not living in my sonship as a son of the Most High God, that instead I'm getting stressed that I'm behind. And so a dear friend of mine, Darla Von Moose, she and I've known her for decades now. She once, at a perfect moment in my life, just said, "Hey, I need to tell you this. You are right on schedule." And if you saw right on my computer screen, I've got a little post-it note, and it's kind of faded from the light. I have to rewrite it every few years, but it's quoting her, "Darla Von Moose, you are right on schedule."
That's good. I might have to use that myself because I think for all of us, we get caught in that trap where you get behind, you get stressed out, and you kind of lose that perspective. What's a tradition or something, and it could be either carried over from childhood that you now do with your family or one that you've created with your family, but what's a tradition that you look forward to every year?
Sure. Well, the first when you said that, I went to a different one that I look forward to every night. But that is praying with my kids at night before they go to bed. It's such special time to me to get to conclude the day with them and to say our prayers together, but just to make sure that they end the day well. And then, thankfully, most mornings I also get to wake them up. Every now and then they surprise me and they wake up before me. But it's so meaningful to me. It actually has impacted a lot how I treat travel, that if I can't be with the family, do I really need to go? And it's led to a lot of changes, even in how I interact with my professional schedule, just that I love so much that we get to pray together at night and that I get to wake them up in the morning.
Yeah, very cool. What's something that you and your wife like to do that's either a special date night or a special tradition? What's something just for you and your wife?
Yeah, so we'll bounce around on if it's a weekly lunch date or a weekly dinner date or what it might be. We're actually just now entering into a phase of weekly dinner dates because the girls have youth group on Wednesday nights. So it's perfect, win-win. But it's so funny. I smile when you say that because we've had instances, especially in small, intimate restaurants where we live in small communities, where people will even overhear what we're talking about and people will think it's a business meeting that's happening. But to us, it's a date, because heck, business is sexy. Like, to me, when I met her, like she had launched and was running the Center for Entrepreneurship at our college. And I thought that was the sexiest thing ever. Like, here's this woman who's beautiful, loves the Lord, athletic, all the things, but knows business and loves business, and we can talk shop. Wow. So for us, we get together and we just talk through, pray through, strategize through, dream through. What are the things we're a part of now? What are the things that are coming in the future? What have we learned from the past? Absolutely love it. And that I get to be partnered with her, just in our marriage, but also in business and in life. It's something I would never trade.
That's awesome. So wrap up talking about legacy, because obviously you're creating it every single day and you've got many, many, many years ahead, but many, many years from now, what do you hope that people say about you and your impact here on earth and obviously with Immix Law Group?
Yeah, this is kind of a fun one for me. And not to be too cavalier about it, but I always think of it in terms of, if God says jump, my answer needs to be how high? Not are you sure, or is that you, Lord, or let's do something else or negotiate. I just want to know that if God asks, I say yes. That's my goal, and that's what I want to be my legacy. And I got to see a neat version, a neat pull through of that with something related to Immix. This was now a few years ago, but when I had started moving around, because the headquarters of Immix is in Portland, Oregon. We had started the firm there, but we have offices in Seattle. We serve 16 markets, so we're a lot more spread out in the US. And when I started not living in the town that headquarters was in, we'd start to have these team members that I didn't spend as much time with. And so it was just part of, as the firm grew, something that was interesting. But I'll never forget, we had a clerk class come through, and there was one clerk in particular that I had almost no interaction with. And I was even kind of feeling bad about it. It's like, wow, I want to make sure that this clerk, that people had been feeding into this person, pouring into this person, that he was getting the full experience and that it was going to be a blessing to him that he had been at Immix during that time. And so I just set up a time to talk to him before his last day. And I said, hey, give me everything. What's been going on? And was thankful to learn that, people have been pouring into him. All of that have been working out great. I said, well, and you and I haven't gotten to interact. So, and we see each other at the weekly stand-ups, but that's it. What do you know about me? And he kind of smiled and he said, this was interesting to me, but I've heard and I've gotten the sense that you just want to be known as the guy who, when God asked, you said yes. Yes. That was such a beautiful way of seeing things pulled through.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, and actions speak louder than words, right? Like when you go and you pour into others and you help them solve their challenges and their problems, and you do everything that we're talking about all throughout this interview, like people see that and they notice that, and that, when God asks, you jump. So you say yes. So carry that into where we can go to carry this conversation forward. So website, social media, where do we go to follow your efforts and learn more about Immix Law Group?
Sure. So immixlaw.com is our website. It's probably the best way to check us out and see what we're doing. But even this topic we're talking about, and to me, almost more importantly, is that everyone knows how God talks to them. If people are hearing this and they think, well, God doesn't talk to me, reach out, send me an email, find me on the website. Like, I will help you distill and listen and learn how God's talking to you, because I think God's talking to all of us. And we just need to learn how. And it's something that comes with practice and with time. People will build muscles by working out. This is a muscle that can be toned and refined and worked out. And then to get to live in that communion with your creator, it's amazing. And those of us that do, I just challenge us to be listening, and it's not just in the big stuff. It's almost especially in the little stuff, the little divine appointments. You're walking down the road and you feel the nudge that you're supposed to talk to someone. Talk to them. Even though it could be embarrassing, even though it could make you late. So many stories I could tell you, but we're out of time. But it's just beautiful when you lean into that and you say yes to that. And it's okay if you miss it. Just be ready for the next one. God's bigger than all of us. God will do what God's going to do. But we get blessed when we say yes and we lean into those moments.
Yeah. Well, Jerry, you are a change maker. You are an inspiration. Greatly appreciate everything you do. You and your amazing team to power the good. So thank you for being a part of the ChangeMakers podcast.
Yeah, don't give me too much credit. I'm just thankful. Thanks, Jeremy.
Higginbotham Insurance and Financial Services is proud to power the ChangeMakers podcast. We're a people-first company that protects what matters most, the families, businesses, and trailblazers that keep our community going. As one of the nation's top independent insurance firms, Higginbotham is a single-source solution for business insurance, employee benefits, HR services, and personal insurance that's customized for you. We're here to serve you, the people you care about, and your community. Call 866-377-1959 or visit higginbotham.com.